So this is really nice for you to give us a little bit of your time, Darick Robertson.
Thank you very much.
I'm really honored for you to be there in our podcast.
Bonjour.
So, yeah, actually, you're going to do the whole podcast in French, isn't it?
Pas très bien français.
So,
That's all I can say.
So since it's the first time we speak together, a lot of people actually know who you are, but how would you summarize yourself? How would you introduce yourself today, Darick?
I'm a very lucky person. My name's Darick Robertson. I've been drawing comics since I was 17 years old, which was many decades ago. And I am mostly known for The Boys, which is now worldwide famous, but was not when I started it. And I'm also known for a comic called Transmetropolitan, which I'm very proud of.
Among other things.
What's that?
Among other projects.
Wolverine, The Punisher, Spider-Man. I wrote and drew Batman a couple of years ago.
Yeah. You came from the indie scene at first. I think I remember you grew up reading Snoopy.
Yes, that was the first thing I learned to draw was Snoopy on the Doghouse as the ace pilot.
Yeah, and there was
I drew it for my doctor, and he kept it on the wall.
Really?
Yeah,
he's got an original.
Long time ago. Yes, I don't think he's around anymore, but he was very helpful. Got me over my allergies. Thank you, Dr. Peters.
Thank you, Dr. Peters. If you're hearing this, you made a quick stint also on comics, which was called Space Beavers.
Yes, I created that when it's Space Beaver singular, just one beaver. I created that in summer school when I was 16 and never in a million years thought it would be the first thing that got published. But it was a time when the Ninja Turtles had broken big in the indie comics scene and had gone from being this quirky black and white book to, national sensation, TV cartoon, toy line. And the original issues of that went way up in price. So any black and white indie comic book with animals in it suddenly were being looked at like, oh, is this the next Ninja Turtles? And there was some good ones like Fish Police, and there were some obvious ripoffs like Radioactive Black Belt Hamsters or something like that. And some were good, some were bad. In the midst of all of that, I had no idea any of this was going on. I just really liked Rocket Raccoon by Mike Mignola and Bill Mantlo at the time. And I liked Captain Carrot and the Amazing Zoo Crew. And I also have a sick sense of humor that is probably why I ended up working with the guys that I've worked with. But I love the idea of these cute little fuzzy, happy animals, with a lot of angst and drama. And when they would fight, they would, blood and guts and bone would fly out of their cute little teddy bear bodies. That just made me laugh. And so there it was. And then, I just made up a story as I was going just to entertain myself in school. And I was making it up panel by panel. And I was fortunate enough to meet a young man named Michio Okamura, who is, I put a Y in his name, and it's Michio Okamura, who now works in video games. But Michio was a professional inker working for a tiny company called Viz. And he liked my work enough that he sent it to his publisher, and they said, hey, we'll do Space Beaver as a backup feature, but we can't pay you. But I was like in high school living with my parents. So I'm like, yay, publishing. That's great. No money. That would be the theme of my life. But I got excited, and he taught me how to put real comic book pages together at the proper size and introduced me to tools I didn't know how to use because I was just using typing paper and ballpoint pens and whatever, black marker I could get my hands on. And from there, I started doing actual original art, and I showed it to a man named Tibor Sardi, who owned a comic book store that I would go to in my hometown of San Mateo. And he got on that boat too of like, hey, this will be the next Ninja Turtles, and I really believe in your work. And bless his heart, he had the best of intentions for me, and he published 11 issues of Space Beaver, which I wrote and drew. I had no idea what I was doing, and but I put out 11 issues of it, and it got me going to Comic Cons and meeting people. And I always thought my first big thing would be something drawn like Spider-Man or Batman, and that would come later. But Space Beaver got me into the business.
So it was in 1986.
86 it started.
So this means that next year we are celebrating the 40 years of Space Beaver.
Yes, and there's an omnibus in the works that I'm making a special edition of. So I'm going back. All the original art was lost. So I don't have, the worst part is I have none of the original art from my very first comic books. I don't think it ever made it back from the printer because I don't think the bills got paid. Because just like everything else in my career, like usually like right when I break in is when everything tanks. So like when I broke into Marvel, it was right before they went bankrupt, and that seems to be a reoccurring theme for me. But I never got the original art back, but we are doing an omnibus by doing reproductions of the original comics. But I was so poor when I was doing the comics back in the day, I couldn't afford Zipatone. Zipatone was this stuff that you would use to put the dot patterns onto black and white art. And I was working 2 after-school jobs as it was. And so, but that stuff was very expensive, even if I had a good job, which I didn't. And I ran out about halfway through the first issue. And I went to ink washes because it seemed a lot easier to do ink washes, or at least definitely more cheap. But because they weren't set up at the printer for me to be doing ink washes, they just printed them the way a black and white comic would be printed, and therefore the gray tones turned flat, and it ended up looking like mud. So the first issue of Space Beaver looks like absolute garbage about halfway through. And, this is on top of me not having any idea how to draw a comic book. But now that I'm older, and if I had the original art scanned properly, I would just re-release that. But since I don't, but now I have all these wonderful digital tools I didn't have in 1986. So I'm able to, Zipatone is free when it's digital. And so I could put in gradation tones and things like that. But I'm also kind of going in and carving out what I can of that original art, so you could see what my intentions were. And then I started, there's an expression called, pulling a thread on a sweater. And it means that you unravel what you've built, and it becomes, and so that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm restoring all of that art. So when the omnibus comes out, it'll be more of a special edition. I figure if you have seen the original Space Beaver or want to see the original Space Beaver, it's still there to be found. I'm not trying to find every copy and burn them or anything, but I figure at the same time, it's probably going to be more of a curiosity piece for people than anything else. Like, oh, this is the guy that did The Boys in his first comic book work. So I'm trying to make it something worth looking at and worth reading.
Yeah, and I was just genuinely wondering if you were just going to do some a new story, maybe for the omnibus, or maybe just go back to Space Beaver and try to launch a mini series. Or
in 2000, I convinced my friend Larry Young convinced me. He kept bugging me about doing a collected Space Beaver, but I never finished issue 12. I left number 11 as a cliffhanger in 1989, and I figured nobody was reading it, so who cares? But he's like, you got to finish it, man. Because Larry's great that way. And I said, I'll do it if, somebody will collect the whole thing. And he said he would. So I did the last chapter, and the art takes this dramatic leap forward, because I was working on Marvel stuff by then. And so I did finish that 12 issues. But if the omnibus does well enough, I actually have plans to do some more with some really fun, like a lot of my friends that are, well-known writers. I've already said they'd do it with me. They would write me Space Beaver stories that I'll illustrate. So I'm hoping that will come to be. So if you really want to see that, you got to buy the omnibus, because if the omnibus doesn't sell, nobody's going to give me any money for Space Beaver now any more than they did then.
This is your battle chasers. In terms of delay.
Yeah. When I had a choice at one point with Space Beaver, I could do work that would give me money so I could eat, or I could keep drawing Space Beaver. So I made the choice to not starve to death.
And you're one of the guy to move further away from Space Beaver, who did well in both mainstream and indie comics, while keeping a similar approach to graphic ideas. Space Beaver, in a way, it's like a toon and violent comics.
Yeah.
It's something that you did also with Happy or Transmetropolitan or The Boys eventually, which is a little lost toon. What would you say, how would you say your style managed to fit both the superhero and the indie genre while maintaining the same sort of vibe?
I have no idea. I just draw what makes me happy or makes me laugh, or I just like stories. I like good stories. And if I can tell a story well, that's all my intention is. So, with the coincidence of the comic book Happy, that was sort of my sweet spot because it had characters that were like my Space Beaver characters. Like Happy himself was a cartoon animal. And then also Nick Sachs, which is his contrast, was, a very gritty Punisher-like, character. So drawing the two of them together was very natural. Plus I love that kind of contrast. Again, it goes back to my sixth sense of humor. You're going to tell me there's a cute little unicorn Pegasus, up against a guy who's blowing people's brains out. I'm like, sign me up. That's perfect for me. So, but even with, I loved punk rock music and new wave stuff in my teen years, and Spider Jerusalem really fit that. And so and I love sci-fi stories, and I love Future Shock, and I loved Heavy Metal Magazine growing up, as right alongside my superhero stuff, I was discovering Mila Manara and Richard Corbin and Mobius, of course, who would go on to do Transmet covers for me and blow my mind. But, or for us, but to see Mobius draw my character was like, oh, I like hearing Elvis sing one of your songs. But it was a great, for me, I always have been drawn to independent and original stuff. But I also have a deep love for superhero comics. So for me, it was, I don't know. I don't really see myself changing my style for either. I just try to tell a good story, and I try to match or meet the writer where they're at. So with Greg Rucka on Wolverine, Greg was a great collaborator and inclusive. And so he'd say, hey, when do you want to draw this issue? And so I remember one time saying to him, I want Wolverine to run off a cliff and smash through the windshield of a helicopter and cut up the pilots, and they crash. And that ended up in an issue, but also ended up in Wolverine Origins. He jumps through the windshield of a helicopter after we did that issue. So I see that and I go, hey, that's me. I thought of that.
You mentioned Transmetropolitan. It's a comics that comes up a lot in the conversations between fans, because it seems like it's futuristic, and it's less and less futuristic on a lot of points. Is it something that I don't know if you look only on the graphic side, but if you feel like this will be your seminal work, or how I'm sorry, my English is
it's okay.
a little limited. Probably. If it aged well on all of these aspects that are both graphical and on the writing part.
The funny part of Transmetropolitan is what we didn't get right, but it's the stuff that I wish we did get right was wrong. But what's funny is that when I look back at that, I'm still very proud of it. I think it's a good story, and I'm happy that we kept the art team together for all 60 issues, and that, it's so common for teams to fall apart midway through a run. But with Transmet, we really kept it together, and it was always under extreme circumstances where we thought we were going to get canceled all the time. And we went through like 9 editors. So the fact that we all stayed together, but editors came and went, was a funny thing. But within the story, I think it was a little sad that we thought people would still care about reading newspapers and would listen to journalists in the future. And of all the things I could see coming, I never predicted an iPhone. It's so funny because I drew these people with these headsets on that do what an iPhone would do, and I didn't really see an iPhone coming, or even cell phones at that point, because it was 1997. We were still a couple of years from those being commonplace. So it was a funny view of the future based on, it was all based on an existing world. And even Warren Ellis was looking a bit backwards for the politics, where the Beast was inspired by Nixon, and the Smiler was inspired by Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, who were, politicians of the day. But he was looking for those contrasts, and Warren really educated me a lot about what was going on in the world at the time and turned me on to journalists I hadn't read. I had read Hunter S. Thompson and quite liked him. And he was sort of the main inspiration for Spider Jerusalem's personality and presence, but his actual writing and what he went after was based on a wider view that Warren had a much better education on than I did. But I never looked back. Like even today, I still feel very passionate about, you know, what is truth and expressing that and not backing down from, you know, speaking the truth to power as best I can, because I think it's important that we all remember we live in a time of such extreme propaganda and conspiracy theories that are being treated like fact that I don't think people can have real conversations anymore. And that's terrifying to me, because if you both can't agree that the sky is blue and that the ground is hard, then where do you find truth? Where do you find a common place to have an agreement or even an honest disagreement to find a solution? If you're just in controversy all the time, nothing gets done. You're just fighting all the time. And I think we're seeing the effects of that worldwide right now.
Yeah, there's this scene in the comics where I think Spider attends a neo-Nazi meeting, political neo-Nazi meeting.
Joe Heller.
Yeah, which has been, again, a weird preview of the future of the current mainstream political era in the States.
Yeah, that was uncanny. And the presence of the media in the midst of that like these, you know, cute girls are introducing the guy, and it's very pomp and circumstance and fun, like a sports event. That was very prescient, you know, that it wasn't this dark room, back room thing, or that in that reality, it was, you know, front and center in a big meeting. If you look really carefully, you'll see Adolf Hitler in the audience. I drew him specifically at Joe Heller's meeting.
Another thing that you kind of anticipated was the mainstream way that corporations would grasp superhero as a brand with The Boys, obviously. So we all know that DC Comics didn't want to publish it because they felt a little frigid over the blood and violence.
I think it was more of a case that they didn't want it appearing along. If you look at the first original issue of The Boys, you know, and that was originally, it was supposed to be kind of an extension of the Hitman world that Garth and John McCrae had created. And that was our, you know, before we ever got around to doing it, we had discussed that and we're talking to editors at DC, but we came to the realization before we even got the book off the ground that that was going to be, you know, a pretty hard needle to thread. And I think it was me that suggested we make up our own superheroes and did do what Alan Moore did with the Watchmen. And, you know, Blue Beetle became Night Owl and Captain Madam became Dr. Manhattan. That if we could do that, it was a better approach than trying to make it about the DC heroes. And that's where Ennis and I were kind of different minded, is that I had no desire to really besmirch or tear down the DC superheroes. But I think there is an element of it that Ennis rightfully saw as ridiculous that I just sort of take for granted as somebody who grew up with them. He didn't. And so we had and for me, it was just creating with him and creating original characters. That was enough for me. I loved the story. I thought it was an hilarious take on what, you know, because it really was about absolute power corrupting absolutely. And he was like, if these people were really in our world, it would be a mess for them. So so that was our original thinking. But I thought that if, you know, as far as the corporate stuff goes and DC Comics goes, we went to Wildstorm, which was supposed to still be kind of an image centered company, and Jim Lee and all, he approved it and everybody was very happy. And it was the best selling book Wildstorm had at the time. They hadn't had a big hit in years, and The Boys was a monster hit for them. And so we were really surprised. And again, like I was saying, typical of my career, I do something that's number one and somebody comes in and shuts it down. But DC was very kind about it. They just said, you know, if you look at the first issue, Wildstorm had just kind of come into the DC fold. My paper had Vertigo, DC, and Wildstorm on each sheet of paper. And then if you look through number one, you'll see, like, you know, Butcher doing something awful, you know, Superheroes doing something terrible, and then an ad for Justice League. And then you'd see, you know, Butcher, you know, having sex with Rainer, you know, forcefully, and, you know, another horrible thing. Hey, read Batman Monthly, you know. So I think that contrast was a little too close for comfort. And they said, it's not that, you know, it's not that we don't appreciate what you guys are doing. It's just, we don't think it's right for our company. So, but they were very gracious about helping us get set up. And I was under exclusive contract at the time and had 2 young children and had gotten my first house and a mortgage. And so I thought I had work for 5 years. So I was shocked when they said, oh, you know, it's done. And we didn't know that we were going to get picked up right away. So I was, but DC was very helpful in getting us. You kept the copyright moved. For the. Yeah, they gave us our rights back, which is really gracious of them. They could have just buried it or made life hell for us, but they didn't. They, you know, they wanted to maintain a good relationship with us both. And so me especially, I was under exclusive contract. They said, hey, you can stay under exclusive and the benefits, but you can work on The Boys wherever it lands. So I was able to do both. Of course, schedule wise, that became a nightmare, but.
So even though you're really known for your creator-owned work, so you mentioned just before that you have a deep love for superheroes.
I do.
Can you explain why that?
When my earliest memory of superheroes, I was maybe 4 or 5 years old when I got a Batman Mego action figure, and he had a removable cowl, and I would see Batman on TV, the Adam West show, and I just loved it. Like, for me, that I didn't know it was supposed to be funny. It was just Batman. I love the bright colors. I love those characters. And then SuperFriends would come on Saturday morning cartoons. And so I kind of grew up with, especially the DCU. They have a deep place in my heart, and my earliest impressions are DC superheroes. But I would later discover Spider-Man and the X-Men in my teen years and kind of graduate to that stuff. Early Spider-Man like scared me because I didn't understand he was a good guy. I thought he was a villain because of some misunderstanding of what I was reading, and he creeped me out. And so I think it was this. I remember there's a scene in the very first issue of Spider-Man I ever read where Spider-Man catches one of these bad guys who are a team of bad guys, and he strings them up. He strings them up in web with like a note on it. But I had just learned, I was really young. But I just learned that when spiders web up their prey, it's so they go back and drink their blood. Yeah. So I was like, oh my God, Spider-Man's going to go back and drink this guy's blood. That's terrifying, you know. But I would later understand he was Peter Parker and not a blood drinking fiend. But it took me a while. But Batman was very clearly, and that's when Batman was a lot friendlier too. Like, he wasn't Dark Knight, you know, he was Batman, you know. It's like stupid back in the day too, when we were growing up on Saturday morning cartoons in the 70s. If you ever have seen those Super Friends, they're almost hilarious at this point, because, you know, it's like Batman and Robin are out on a sunny day in the Batmobile and like, let's get some fresh apples from a farm, Robin. I'm like, really? You took the Batmobile out for that? You got in full costume to go apple shopping? Hey, it's Batman. Free apples for you, man.
Thanks for saving the city.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they're out in the farm, so what does it mean to that guy? And for me, my mind immediately goes to a farmer, like seeing these guys pull up. And this is why, you know, Ennis and I probably, you know, hit the same note together, but because I imagine like, oh, if the Batmobile pulled up to a farm and these guys in costumes got out, like what a farmer would think of that. Like, what's with you boys? What's with the outfits?
Yeah, that's the City Boys.
Yeah,
always weird. These
you
guys.
A long way from Gotham.
All right. So you love them, so the superheroes.
I do.
So drawing them.
They're like friends. You know, it's for me. It's like also it's a chance to. There's something really beautiful about the superhero legacy that people that I grew up admiring, you know, like you get handed that torch in a way, like, okay, it's your turn to carry it on. So something that I've had, now that I'm older and in my career, I have, you know, young men come up to me and go, "Oh, New Warriors was my first comic book," or "Your issue of Wolverine, which was my first issue of Wolverine, was the first comic I ever bought." And I go, "Wow," you know, so I've become a part of this person's childhood. Or if somebody's an aspiring artist, like maybe my art is making them go, "Oh, I want to draw," and they might go on to be a comic book artist, and the torch will get passed to them. I get to be part of that legacy, and that's not a small thing when you think about it, because long after I'm gone, you know, Batman and Spider-Man will probably keep going, you know, at least for a while. I also try to remember that, you know, they said that about Lone Ranger and Flash Gordon, but they're still out there. Just nobody is excited about them anymore. Yeah, and they'll probably, but you know, these things have their legacy, but there's so little in pop culture that you can point at and go, this is as vibrant and exciting and interesting today as it was when it debuted in the 1940s. And that's so rare. You don't hear music from that era having that kind of impact. Sports stars have kind of been forgotten from that era, you know, for the most part. But Superman, we're all, I don't know about you guys, but I'm so excited about this James Gunn film, because here we go. Like the idea is still so fresh and still speaks to people in a way that when that movie comes out, like my kid can't wait to go see it with me. She's 23, but we're going to go see it together, and we're both excited about it.
You do realize that now you yourself are part of a franchise. Like maybe in 30, 40 years, they'll do a reboot of The Boys.
Yeah,
just like they do with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, or, you know, old shows like that, or I think it was a MacGyver that was rebooted. You know, maybe you will have a new The Boys. Like,
well, if the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are any example, then man, that talk about an idea that just keeps on giving. Like the fact that how many incarnations has that thing had, you know, and to their credit, my friend wrote my friend Dan wrote the Mutant Mayhem, him and his partner Benji, like they wrote that Mutant Mayhem movie, and that's probably my favorite of the bunch, you know. But I'm like, cause I finally saw them in a fresh light, and then right after that got offered, you know, covers and an issue of the new run. So that's crazy. I was actually ended up drawing the Ninja Turtles after all those years.
And it's quite interesting that you just mentioned the James Gunn Superman's movie, because Superman seems to be quite important right now. Even more as a symbol, as a character. But you also the creator of Homelander, and Homelander also tends in the last years to have like quite a popularity. So
I give that credit.
How can we hope for Superman to be a new symbol when Homelander also took so much importance?
I can't take credit for the Homelander that everybody loves. That really comes down to the incredible writers on the show and the amazing talent of Anthony Starr, who out of costume is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. But I think the world of him. But his portrayal of Homelander is just downright classic. I mean, his facial expressions alone have spawned how many memes and gifs, you know, so it's his incredible talent that has made Homelander so popular. Before that show, it was like everybody would come up and ask for a drawing of Butcher, and now people want Homelander, but that was not because of what we did in the comic. That's because of what Anthony brought to the character.
But do you draw him in Anthony Starr fashion way now? Or
No. I'm very clear with everybody. I don't draw the TV actors. If they want to draw in from me, you're going to get the way I design them, because one, I don't really want to do portraits. I've done pictures. I've done promotional work where I've done Anthony's likeness, and also in the backgrounds of the show, you'll see I recreated some of the classic Boys covers, but put the actors in instead of my original characters. So if you look in the background when they're in the walking around Seven Tower, you'll get glimpses of the work they hired me to do to bring that reality together.
In your mind, it's your characters are the comics ones.
Well, I mean, they're two different universes to me. Like what they're doing on the TV show is great, but it's inspired by my work, but it's not trying to be my work. And so I don't really feel like my work should try to chase the thing that's the interpretation. I should just carry on with what, Ennis and I created.
I know, and also like in the last few years, you've done several works, but it's never ongoings anymore. It tends to be like 8 or 12 issues max. My question is it just because you're done with lengthy projects, or has the market and the industry evolved so that we have less and less 60 issue series, for example?
I would say that it's more the latter. The publishing model has changed a lot, and I've tried to do some different things that I wanted to be ongoing, and it just didn't work out. Like Gary Whitta and I did a series called Oliver for Image, and I was very proud of it. I put a lot of work into the artwork, and it was adapting Gary's excellent screenplay. He wrote the movie, one of the writers on Rogue One. He also created the Book of Eli. And this was his initial screenplay that got him work in Hollywood. And Gary and I, good friends. And but the moment we finally got it to press, it kind of died on the vine because it was the year COVID hit. And so it came out right as all the stores were closing. And so 4 issues into it, nobody had ordered it. And I just couldn't afford to keep doing the book, but we wanted that to be an ongoing thing. But it just, sometimes it's circumstantial. Other times it's a model that people want something that you can collect, and you try to tell. I think people have moved on from wanting things incrementally. I think more what has happened is, and ironically, we learned this with Transmetropolitan, but people will wait for the collection. If they like something, they'll buy a couple of issues. And if they like it, they'll stop buying it and wait for the collection to come out, because people like binge viewing. It's like people want to read straight through, which is the manga model. Like people will want to buy the collection over the, incrementals, but, as opposed to the manga model where they put, 10 pages of many different stories into one big volume that you can buy. If you get a series, then people are already following it. It's hard. Retailers up until recently, I don't know if it's going to change now that Diamond has gone bankrupt in the United States, but
it has been bought.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know if that means it's going to change, because clearly if it was a business model that went bankrupt, it's not a business model they want to probably could carry on with. They're probably going to reinvent some things or rethink some things. I mean, logically, but having been in the industry for so very long and worked in every little aspect of it, I actually used to unpack books at Diamond. I worked behind the counter of a comic book shop at one time. I understand it from many different facets. And one of the things that I have realized is that it's really difficult for a retailer, especially with comic books struggling the way that they are, to know if a series is going to be worth investing in. Even if you're a name creator, they'll order big on number 1 and order very sparingly on 2 through 4. But maybe by issue 5, people have caught on, and then the orders or reorders will go up. But initially, if you don't show big numbers immediately, many publishers will go, okay, it's not selling, and they'll pull the plug. So it's very difficult to set up something if you don't have a major company ready to invest in you. That said, I am getting ready to do an ongoing series. So a new creator-owned ongoing series is being developed right now, and hopefully will be out the first issue later this year. I can't say much about it, but hopefully by the time this broadcast goes out, you will have heard of it. So
yeah, or maybe I just torture you, so you
can torture
spill the beans.
You hit pause, I'll tell you about it.
No, it's all right. But how did you choose your projects in the last few years? And did you feel that? For example, when you're doing a Batman Fortress, for example, do you feel like that through the years you could more choose the projects in the mainstream media, because maybe before you were assigned to projects and you didn't have much of a choice? No,
I mean, assign is probably never a really good word to use at this point. Like, nobody ever calls me and makes me do something, which is what an assignment would be.
Yeah, no.
I get offered things, and if I'm interested in doing it, I do. But offers. I found out recently that a lot of people just assume I'm busy. So when I needed work, I wasn't getting work. So sometimes you have to go chase something down or call or ring, knock on some doors or, email some editors and go, hey, do you got anything? And they'll go, hey, I got this. Do you want to do that? And that's how I'd end up on 4 issues of this or backup story here. Because a lot of times I have plans for projects that end up not getting off the ground, or like I say, I get going on something and it would stop. And, you know, so it's sort of a happenstance. If they offered me something that I would really want to do, I would be all over it. But it's just, doing a monthly book on somebody else's character at this stage, unless it's with a really great writer or something I could really do something original with, it's not as appealing because I've done it. You know, I had my time with Wolverine. I got to write and draw Batman recently. I would still love to work on more Batman, but I don't think that my style is what they're looking for, you know. And I think in some ways, maybe my superhero style has been tainted because of the success of The Boys. Like maybe they don't want that association with it any more than they wanted it back in 2007. But I don't know. I mean, I had a good time drawing Batman and I loved writing him. I mean, but I don't see a world where they call me up and say, Darick, do an ongoing Batman series, you know.
But so you still do want to draw comics. You're not, because you've been around for 30 years?
At least.
Yes, at least in the industry, and I could assume that maybe you're also tired, and maybe you could just do like commissions and covers and get on with it.
No, I'm not tired.
But you're still willing to produce new stories, to create stuff.
I love creating stories, and if I'm writing and drawing something, I really love it. If I'm drawing something where I'm collaborating with the writer and I get my own ideas and we work together, that's fantastic. I love doing that. I love coming up with new characters. I think I'm just more interested at this stage, for a number of reasons, into bringing new things into the world than I am about being part of the, you know, sustaining the things that already exist. I think that's good for the young people, the younger artists that have more time and energy than I do to get their opportunity. I'd rather see somebody else that loves Batman or Superman or Wolverine to get their shot at it. And hopefully they're doing it for the love and not just for the income.
But how do you create something new in 2025 when there are so many things that have been done? Aren't you afraid of trying something and telling yourself like, but maybe someone already did it, or just by checking if that already exists, finding something similar?
I always, you know, I think original ideas are, sometimes you can have an old idea, but you can bring an original spin to it. You know, sometimes it's like music, you know, you could sing, twist and shout, but if you put a totally different beat to it and find some new way to do twist and shout, it's a new song. You know, sometimes it's about bringing your own voice and your own style to, and your own integrity to a project that already exists. So I know I don't worry about, you know, an old idea can become new again. I've said for years, there are no bad characters. They're just the way they're handled. I look at, you know, Deadpool is a great example. Like Deadpool wasn't what he became and didn't become so popular from what it was when it came out in the 90s. It's when Joe Casey and Ed McGuinness got a hold of it and made him break the fourth wall and, you know, all that crazy fun stuff. You know, that's what made Deadpool. And this, again, like Dark Knight Returns is a good example. Back in the mid 80s, Batman had gotten sort of like predictable and stale and was, you know, kind of a kid friendly character. Frank Miller changed all that just by writing the story that he wanted to tell about Batman coming out of retirement and bringing his Frank Miller to it all. So, you know, that's the way I think all this stuff works. I don't, you know, I could probably do something with Buck Rogers that would be different if you just let me run with it, because it would be what I think Buck Rogers should be. You know, sure, it's Buck Rogers and you've heard of it, but maybe there's something new I could bring to it because I might have a take on it that somebody else wouldn't. So the old can become new again, just with a fresh set of expectations and integrity rather than, you know, just a lot of times what happens. I remember in my waning days at Marvel, they were asking me what I wanted to do. And I said, well, let's do something with Moon Knight. And I was told, oh, that's just a poor man's Batman. You know, he's, and then, you know, here he is. He's got his own TV series. Moon Knight was a great character. It's just, you know, if you are always looking backwards with a character, then yeah, it's going to be tired and predictable if you handle it in a tired and predictable way. But if you have an original idea or original intention and you pursue that, well, then you're going to get an original take. You know, like I said, The Boys is a good example of that. We just looked at superheroes in a different way.
But have you seen the Moon Knight TV series?
Yeah.
And you liked what you saw?
I liked the first 2 episodes. I haven't seen the whole thing yet. I enjoyed what I saw.
Okay, so you just saw the 2 episodes or so. All right. And there's also another danger in the industry right now, which is AI, of course.
Yeah.
So what's your stance about that?
You know, I think
I
AI...
guess you get asked that a lot, maybe?
Not really, but... you know, nobody cares what I think, but
we do. That's why you're here.
Nobody but your listeners care what I think, but and thank you. But no, AI. This is how I honestly feel about AI. It's a new thing, and every time something new in technology makes its way into the mainstream, there's 2 reactions to it. It's the greatest thing ever, or you got to fear it. And I don't know. Here's what I honestly believe. AI is interesting, but it will never do what an artist can do. And AI can only react to what a real artist can do, for the simple reason is that AI cannot feel. And great art comes from something you've experienced. So AI will never put a dog to sleep and cry over it. AI will never lose a parent. AI will never have a girl break its heart. AI will never hear a song and have a memory of their grandfather. You know, these are all things that create art. Music and good artwork comes from real experiences, and everybody's voice that, you know, often people will come to me and say, I can't even draw a stick figure. Well, if that person turns to AI and is able to create something, it's not going to be any better if they haven't put the time in to understand how good art happens. Good art comes from years of experience and an endless desire to practice and hone your craft. If you're using AI as a tool to shortcut, it's going to show. And a lot of times AI still makes stupid mistakes, can't seem to figure out a hand, you know? And so, you know, if that is your way of getting your art out there, that's fine, but don't be surprised if nobody wants it. If your voice is original, I'd rather look at somebody that draws like Linda Berry or Daniel Clowes, who's an incredible craftsman, but has a very different style from mainstream comics. I'd rather look at that than I would somebody's AI concept. And AI is kind of obvious. And so maybe we'll get past that. I don't know. But I don't think it's anything to fear. I think it's a tool like anything else. And I think ultimately, unless, you know, we reach the, the singularity. If we reach the singularity, maybe we have something to worry about. But I honestly think that you know, there was a time when, you know, radio was terrifying and, you know, television was going to destroy the world, you know, and, you know, maybe it did. I don't know, but I'm not worried about it. I just focus on what I'm doing and trying to make stuff that's good. If people want it and people are interested, yay, I've won. That's all I've wanted since I was 16. And I'm blessed enough that I get to be sitting here in Paris, France, talking to you about what I've done and what I will do.
So what will you do? What's next for you? So you mentioned that you've got a project.
I want to talk I want to tell you all about it, and it makes me angry that I can't, because we're still trying to get the you know, contracts signed, and then of course the company's going to want to announce it. So I can't you know, spoil the surprise.
All right, but we'll be looking forward to it.
I hope that by the time this comes out, you've heard of it, and we can be all, you know, and I'll follow up with you somehow.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.